History is not the quiet story we were taught. Scattered across the globe, physical objects defy our understanding of the ancient world. These mysterious artifacts suggest ancient global contact, whispering of voyages and exchanges long forgotten by our textbooks. By the end of our journey, you will see the map of human history redrawn with connections we are only beginning to grasp. How did a complex astronomical computer sink in a Roman shipwreck 2,000 years ago? Why does a map from the 1500s show a continent buried under ice for? We will explore 20 of these enigmatic clues, from disputed batteries to sunken monuments, each one a piece of a vast and puzzling mosaic. What does it mean for our story if the ancient world was already a connected one? The diver held a piece of history so advanced it would rewrite our understanding of ancient science. The mechanism, as it came to be known, was not a simple clock or a decorative trinket. It was a complex astronomical computer, a device of bronze gears and intricate dials housed in a wooden case about the size of a large shoebox. For decades after its discovery, the true nature of this corroded lump remained a mystery, its secrets locked inside layers of calcified sea deposit. It was only with the advent of modern X-ray and imaging technology that researchers could peer inside without destroying it. What they found was breathtaking. Dozens of precisely cut bronze gears, some with teeth so fine they resembled the workings of an 18th century Swiss watch, interlocked to form a mechanical model of the cosmos. By turning a hand crank on the side, an operator could calculate the positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets. It could predict lunar and solar eclipses, and even account for the irregular orbit of the moon with a sophisticated gear train that mimicked celestial mechanics. This was not just a tool for curiosity, it was a sophisticated instrument for navigation, calendar keeping, and perhaps even planning important civic and religious events. The historian J. Price, who dedicated years to its study, famously declared it more valuable than the Mona Lisa. He argued it represented a level of technological sophistication that simply vanished from the historical record for over 1,000 years. Its very existence forces a profound question. Was this device a singular, miraculous flash of genius in the ancient Greek world, a pinnacle of knowledge that was tragically lost? Or does its intricate design hint at a broader, perhaps shared, technological tradition? Could the knowledge required to craft such precise have been influenced by, or even shared with, other advanced centers of learning in the ancient world, from Alexandria to possibly even farther afield? The mechanism stands as our first, and perhaps most definitive clue. It proves categorically that our ancestors were capable of engineering feats we scarcely believed possible. It shatters the assumption that ancient technology was primitive, setting a new and astonishing benchmark for our entire investigation. If they could build this, what else did they know, and more importantly, who else might they have told, while the mechanism represents a pinnacle of mechanical genius? Our next artifact suggests a quieter, more subtle form of power. In the basement of the National Museum of Iraq sits an unassuming clay jar, roughly the size of a man's fist, dated to the Parthian period around 2,000 years ago. Its discovery in the 1930s near Baghdad seemed mundane at first, just another piece of ancient pottery. But inside, researchers found a curious assembly, an iron rod suspended inside a rolled copper cylinder, the two metals kept separate by an asphalt plug at the mouth. To any modern eye, the configuration is unmistakable. It looks exactly like a simple galvanic cell, a basic battery. The implications of this identification are staggering. If this jar was filled with an acidic electrolyte, something as common as vinegar or fermented grape juice, it would produce a low-voltage electric current, around 1 volt. The so-called Baghdad Battery instantly became one of the most controversial objects in archaeology. The debate is fierce and unresolved. One compelling theory posits a practical, even artistic, application: electroplating. A small current from such a cell could be used to deposit a thin layer of gold onto a silver object, a technique that would explain the exquisite gold-plated artifacts found from the same era without evidence of the mercury gilding commonly used elsewhere. It suggests a form of ancient chemistry that borders on alchemical magic, using invisible forces to transform one metal's appearance into another. Skeptics offer a more mundane explanation, that the jar was simply a secure storage vessel for important religious scrolls, with the copper cylinder acting as a protective case and the iron rod as a rusting, sealed-in placeholder. Yet experiments with replicas prove the design functionally works as a battery. This leaves us with a haunting possibility that a working understanding of electrochemistry existed and was possibly applied, only to be forgotten for centuries until figures like Volta and rediscovered the principle. The artifact does not stand as proof of ancient power grids or electric lighting, but it does whisper of experimentation. It hints at a culture actively probing the properties of the natural world, asking what happens when certain metals and fluids interact. If such knowledge was pursued in Mesopotamia, could the concept have traveled? Could traders or scholars have carried the idea of a current-producing jar along the Silk Road, inspiring curious minds in distant workshops? The Baghdad Battery, whether a practical tool or an accidental discovery, challenges the linear timeline of invention. It places a spark of potential, a flicker of electrical understanding, squarely in the hands of a civilization we are still learning to appreciate, forcing us to wonder what other subtle technologies, other quiet forms of power, have been entirely lost to the passage of time. From the quiet potential of a clay jar in Baghdad, we travel to the sun-baked walls of an Egyptian temple, where a carving has ignited a debate that cuts to the very heart of how we interpret the ancient world. Deep within the Temple of Hathor, a stone relief presents an image that feels out of place. It shows a large, elongated object pear-shaped like a modern light bulb. Inside it, a serpentine line stretches from a base plate to the narrow end, resembling a filament. This bulb sits upon a stand that looks like an insulator, and from its base, a cable or cord snakes away to a small box held by a kneeling figure, while another figure appears to be supporting or adjusting the device. To the untrained modern eye, the resemblance is uncanny and immediate. It looks like an electrical lamp in operation. This is the so-called light. Egyptologists provide a compelling and widely accepted interpretation rooted in the rich symbolism of Egyptian mythology. They explain that the scene depicts the creation myth of the lotus flower emerging from the primordial waters. The bulb shape represents the lotus bud, the serpent inside is the god being born from it, and the arm reaching in symbolizes the moment of divine creation and the breath of life. The box is interpreted as the pillar, a symbol of stability, and the entire tableau is a spiritual allegory, not an engineering diagram. Yet, for those who see the Baghdad Battery as evidence of lost electrical knowledge, the carving offers a tantalizing parallel. They argue the depiction is too precise, too mechanically detailed, to be purely symbolic. Could it be that the priests of Hathor, seeking to represent a profound and mysterious power, used the most advanced technology they knew of as a metaphor? If the Baghdad jars could produce a current, perhaps they were used to create a glowing arc or a sustained spark within an evacuated glass vessel, a phenomenon that would indeed seem magical and divine. This theory, while far from mainstream, forces us to confront an intriguing question about the transmission of ideas. Even if the carving is purely symbolic, symbolism must draw from the known world. The precise form of a long snake within a confined, bulbous space, connected by a cord to a power source, is a very specific visual idea. Could this iconography have been inspired by stories or sketches brought by travelers from distant lands where such experiments with light were occurring? The relief illuminates the delicate interface between myth and machine. It challenges us to consider whether ancient artists were documenting spiritual concepts alone, or if they were sometimes using the language of emerging technology to explain the unexplainable. Whether it is a snapshot of forgotten engineering or a masterpiece of metaphysical art, it serves as a powerful reminder that our ancestors communicated in a visual language we are still learning to read. a language where the line between a god being born from a lotus and a lamp being powered by a box is, quite literally, carved in stone. The stone walls hold a silent debate, but a piece of parchment from a much later era speaks with a startlingly clear and confident voice. In the library of the palace in Istanbul, a forgotten map fragment resurfaced in 1929, a document that would send shockwaves through the world of historical geography. It was drawn on gazelle skin in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer. At first glance, it is a beautiful artifact of the age of exploration, showing the familiar coastlines of Western Africa, the eastern bulge of South America, and even a series of islands that some believe could represent the Caribbean. But then the eye travels south, to the bottom of the parchment, and the mind struggles to reconcile what it sees. There, depicted with surprising accuracy, is a long, detailed landmass connected to South America, a landmass that should not exist on any map from the 16th century. It bears a striking and deeply controversial resemblance to the coastline of Antarctica, a continent that would not be officially sighted by European explorers for another 300 years. In 1820, the impossibility deepens. The map does not just show Antarctica, it shows it seemingly free of its monumental ice cap, depicting bays, inlets, and a topography that matches modern seismic surveys of the continent's subglacial coastline. The last time Antarctica was in such a condition, according to geological evidence, was over 6,000 years ago, at the end of the last major glacial period. How could a 16th century admiral, working with the knowledge of his time, possibly chart a continent buried under miles of ice? The map itself provides a tantalizing clue. In his own notes, was remarkably candid about his sources. He stated that his world chart was compiled from 20 older source maps, including several that dated back to the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century before the Common Era. He even referenced what he called the maps of the infidels, likely referring to Portuguese, Spanish, and Arabic charts. But the most critical admission was that some of these source maps were, in his words, from the time of the Seven Seas. This is interpreted by many researchers as a reference to a legendary, even antediluvian, age of seafaring. This transforms the map from a mere curiosity into a potential palimpsest, a copy of copies, a fragile paper trail leading back into deep time. The theory is as profound as it is simple. The cartographic knowledge of Antarctica, and perhaps the entire globe, was not discovered in the 1500s, but rediscovered. It implies the existence of an ancient, sophisticated maritime civilization, or a network of them, that possessed the skill to undertake global exploration and the scientific rigor to accurately chart their findings. This knowledge was then preserved in great libraries, like the one in Alexandria, only to be scattered and degraded over centuries. Fragments of it eventually found their way into the hands of men who faithfully incorporated them without fully understanding their origin. The map stands as a ghost image, a cartographic echo of a world that once was, drawn by a man who lived in a world that had forgotten it. It forces us to ask, if such precise geographical data could survive for thousands of years through copying and translation, what other libraries of ancient knowledge were lost to fire, decay, or simply the slow erosion of memory? The coastline on that gazelle skin is not just land, it is a shoreline of time, and it suggests our history books are missing entire chapters of exploration. Far from the inked lines of ancient maps, a different kind of mystery lies half-buried in the river deltas of Costa. Here, nestled in the jungle soil or standing silent in village squares, are the stone spheres of the hundreds of them, ranging from the size of a bowling ball to colossal orbs over 2 meters across and weighing more than 15 tons. They were crafted over 1,000 years ago by a pre-Columbian culture that left no written records, only these enigmatic, nearly perfect geometries in granite. Their smooth, weathered surfaces offer no inscriptions, no carvings, no clear instructions from the past. They are simply there, a silent congregation of spheres whose purpose has been utterly lost to time. Were they astronomical markers, aligned to track the solstices or certain stars? Could they have been symbols of power and status, arranged in patterns outside the homes of chieftains? Some theories suggest they marked territorial boundaries or sacred ceremonial spaces. Yet the most enduring question is not why they were placed, but how they were made. The precision is astounding. Using only stone hammers, fire, water, and abrasives, these ancient artisans achieved a spherical perfection that rivals modern machining. The variance in diameter across some of the largest spheres is measured in mere millimeters. This level of skill in stoneworking suggests generations of accumulated, specialized knowledge, a tradition of geometry made manifest in rock. This achievement invites a deeper contemplation. The drive to create perfect geometric forms, especially the sphere, appears across ancient cultures separated by oceans. It is seen in the carved stone balls of Neolithic Scotland, and in the profound philosophical importance of the sphere in ancient Greek thought, where it was considered the most perfect shape. Could the knowledge of creating such forms, or at least the symbolic value placed upon them, represent a shared concept that traveled? Was the sphere, as an ideal, part of a slow exchange of architectural or philosophical ideas across continents, carried by traders or storytellers? Or does its repeated emergence speak to something intrinsic in the human mind, a universal recognition of harmony and balance found in this most fundamental of shapes? The spheres resist easy answers. They are not tools, not weapons, not practical in any obvious sense. They represent a monumental investment of labor for a purpose we can no longer decipher. In their silent, stubborn presence, they testify to a human urge that transcends utility, the urge to impose perfect order on a chaotic world, to create an object of such simple, profound beauty that it would outlast languages, empires, and memory itself. They remind us that some of our ancestors were not just surviving, they were pursuing an ideal, and they may have been sharing that pursuit with distant minds we have yet to fully connect. The silent perfection of the spheres gives way to a book filled with frantic, incomprehensible whispers. In a quiet vault at Yale University lies an object that has understanding for over a century, a manuscript that is arguably the world's most famous puzzle. It is the manuscript, a codex of about 240 vellum pages, penned in an elegant but utterly unknown script and illustrated with paintings of a world that feels both familiar and profoundly alien. Since its rediscovery in a European library in 1912, it has resisted every attempt at decryption by the greatest codebreakers of 2 world wars, modern supercomputers, and armies of passionate amateurs. The text flows with the natural rhythm of a real language, showing complex linguistic patterns like word repetition and sentence structure, yet not a single word has been conclusively translated. This is not a simple cipher. It is a complete linguistic system with no key. The illustrations deepen the mystery. They depict botanical specimens of plants that do not exist in any known herbarium, their leaves and roots arranged in impossible configurations. There are astronomical charts showing unfamiliar constellations and celestial diagrams that seem to map a cosmology we cannot recognize. Perhaps most haunting are the series of illustrations known as the balneological section, showing numerous female figures bathing in or interacting with an intricate network of green, tube-like pools and channels, a scene that feels both ritualistic and strangely biological. The sheer coherence of its bizarre internal logic argues against it being a mere hoax, a random collection of nonsense designed to deceive. The effort required to create hundreds of pages of consistent, patterned text and detailed, unique illustrations would be monumental for a medieval forger with no hope of a contemporary audience understanding the joke. This leads to more compelling, if speculative, theories. Could it be a record of a lost language, perhaps from a small community whose knowledge was preserved by a single scholar? Or is it an encoded treatise on proto-scientific or alchemical knowledge, its true meaning hidden from the uninitiated behind a veil of symbols? The most tantalizing idea connects directly to our broader theme. The manuscript's bizarre flora and unique astronomical imagery suggest a synthesis of knowledge from far outside the European tradition. Could it be a copy, or a translation, of a much older work that compiled botanical and celestial observations from across the globe? Imagine a scholar, perhaps in a place like Renaissance Italy, coming into possession of fragments of knowledge from the Americas, from Asia, or from a tradition now lost, and attempting to compile it into a single volume, inventing or adapting a script to protect its secrets. The green bathing pools could then be misinterpreted diagrams of anatomical or hydrological systems from a distant culture. The manuscript is the ultimate locked door. It represents the possibility that a vast repository of alternative knowledge, perhaps from a globally connected network of ancient natural philosophers, was captured in a single volume and then lost behind an unbreakable code. It stands as a silent testament to the most frustrating kind of historical evidence, one we can see and touch, but whose story we cannot hear, reminding us that some conversations from the past may remain forever private. The silent, coded pages of the manuscript offer no answers, only questions. But in a dusty tomb at Saqqara, Egypt, a small wooden object seems to offer a startlingly clear suggestion, one that points not to the stars, but to the sky above. Discovered in 1898 during an excavation of a burial site from around 200 years before the Common Era, this artifact is known simply as the Saqqara Bird. At first glance, it is a graceful, stylized figure carved from sycamore wood, smooth from centuries of handling. Yet a closer look reveals a design that feels strangely anachronistic. While it has the general form of a bird, its wings are perfectly straight and rigid, more like the airfoils of a modern aircraft than the feathered, curved wings of a falcon or dove. Most tellingly, it features a distinct, vertical, a component found on no bird in nature, but absolutely critical for the stability of a fixed-wing glider or airplane. This is not the typical sacred ibis or solar hawk of Egyptian iconography. It is an object that, to our modern eyes, looks engineered. Mainstream archaeology provides a grounded interpretation. Many experts classify it as a ceremonial object, perhaps a votive offering related to a bird cult, or possibly even a child's toy. They point out that the ancient Egyptians were master craftsmen and keen observers of nature, and that stylization is common in their art. In this view, could simply be a stylized bird's tail or a convenient handle. Yet this explanation struggles to account for the specific aerodynamic intelligence seemingly baked into its form. Intrigued by its design, several aeronautical engineers and historians in the later 20th century decided to put the Saqqara Bird to the test. They created precise scale models and launched them. The results were consistent and remarkable. When weighted correctly at the nose, the models demonstrated stable gliding flight. The wings provided lift, and that distinctive vertical provided essential directional stability, preventing the model from spinning out of control. It was not just a shape that looked like a plane, it was a shape that flew like one. This simple fact opens a door to a more speculative, yet fascinating, line of inquiry. If the artifact functions aerodynamically, was that function intentional? Could the craftsman who carved it have been working from observed principles of flight? One theory suggests the ancient Egyptians, through long observation of birds and perhaps even experimentation with paper or reed models, had empirically stumbled upon basic concepts of lift and stability. Another, more provocative idea connects to our theme of lost contact. The Saqqara Bird dates to the Ptolemaic period, a time of intense cultural exchange in Alexandria, where Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian knowledge intermingled. Is it possible that the design was inspired by stories or even physical models brought by travelers from distant cultures who were exploring similar ideas? Could it be a scaled-down representation of a larger, perhaps ceremonial glider technology used in rituals, now lost to time. The object itself refuses to say. It sits at the crossroads of art, toy, and prototype. It challenges us to reconsider what we label as mere ornamentation. When we look at ancient art, are we sometimes looking at diagrams, at inspired representations of advanced concepts that the culture possessed but did not fully develop into what we would call technology? The Saqqara Bird, whether a sophisticated toy or a snapshot of inspired observation, forces a humbling realization. The dream of flight, and perhaps even a practical grasp of its mechanics, may not have been born with Leonardo da Vinci's sketches. It may have taken its first tentative, gliding steps much earlier, in the hands of a curious artisan along the Nile, reminding us that genius is not confined to any one era, and that inspiration can soar on the most unexpected of wings. The dream of flight carved in sycamore wood is one thing, but a spark plug sealed inside a stone is another entirely. This brings us to one of the most hotly debated and persistently puzzling objects in the annals of anomalous finds, the artifact. The story begins in 1961, when three mineral collectors were searching the dry landscape of California's mountains. They found a heavy, lumpy geode, a type of rock that typically contains a hollow cavity lined with crystals. Hoping for a beautiful interior, they took a rock saw and carefully cut it open. Instead of glittering quartz, they found something utterly bewildering. Inside was a hard, ceramic cylinder with a 2 mm metal rod running through its center, all encased in a crumbling shell of hardened clay. To their eyes, it looked unmistakably like a 20th century spark plug, a common piece of automotive technology. Yet, according to initial geological assessments of the surrounding matrix, the nodule appeared to have formed in deposits that were 500,000 years old. The contradiction was absolute, a modern industrial object impossibly trapped in deep time. The artifact was quickly championed as definitive proof of either a lost advanced civilization or ancient extraterrestrial visitation, a literal engine part from a prehuman world. The scientific explanation, however, offers a clear and demystifying pathway. Geologists who have studied the case point to a common natural phenomenon known as a concretion. This is not a true geode formed over eons, but a hard, rounded mass that forms relatively quickly when mineral cement precipitates and solidifies around a foreign object. In this case, the object was almost certainly an early 20th century champion spark plug, likely from mining equipment used in the area decades before. The plug fell or was discarded onto the ground, and over the course of perhaps a few decades, mineral-rich water percolated around it, building up layers of iron oxide and clay that hardened into a convincing, stone-like shell. The process can mimic ancient petrification, tricking the untrained eye. This rational account is compelling and widely accepted within the scientific community. Yet the artifact refuses to fade from the public imagination, and its enduring power is perhaps more important than its actual origin. It has become the ultimate symbol of the anachronistic artifact, the out-of-place object that defies our established timelines. It forces a crucial and humbling discussion about how we interpret the past. When we uncover something that seems impossibly out of sequence, what is our first responsibility? The case teaches that the first step is not to rewrite history, but to rigorously question the artifact itself and our methods of dating and contextualizing it. It highlights the constant tension between extraordinary claims and the patient, often less glamorous, work of geological and archaeological analysis. This object, likely a simple spark plug, challenges us to be better detectives of deep time. It asks us to refine our tools of discernment, to understand processes like concretion, and to recognize that nature itself can create stunning illusions of antiquity. In doing so, it actually strengthens the search for genuine mysteries, by reminding us that the most profound evidence for ancient contact will not be a solitary, incongruous spark plug in a stone, but a pattern of interconnected clues, like the ones we are tracing, that withstand the most rigorous scrutiny. The real lesson is not about what was found, but about how we choose to look. The line between a genuine archaeological puzzle and an elaborate modern myth can be as thin as a stone disk. High in the remote mountains bordering China and Tibet, a story emerged in 1938 that would become a cornerstone of ancient astronaut lore. According to the controversial account, a Chinese archaeologist named Kai discovered a series of strange burial sites within a cave system. Inside were the skeletal remains of individuals with unusually large skulls and small, delicate frames. Scattered around these resting places were hundreds of stone discs, each about 9 inches across with a hole in the center, resembling phonograph records. Their most peculiar feature was a fine, double spiral groove that ran from the center hole out to the rim, a groove that, under magnification, was said to be composed of tiny, unknown hieroglyphic characters. The tale took an even more extraordinary turn years later, when a researcher claimed to have translated the inscriptions. The story etched into the stone told of the people, beings from a distant star whose spacecraft crashed in the mountains 12,000 years ago, unable to return home. The narrative captured the global imagination, presenting what seemed like physical proof of ancient extraterrestrial contact, complete with otherworldly remains and a recorded message. Yet when subjected to academic scrutiny, the entire edifice crumbles. No credible archaeological journal ever published Kai's findings. The supposed discs, often compared to common Bai discs, ceremonial jade artifacts known in Chinese culture have never been produced for independent scientific testing. Most mainstream scholars dismiss the stones as an elaborate hoax born from a fusion of artifacts and creative storytelling in the mid-20th century. Yet the endurance of this story is, in itself, a profound artifact of modern culture. It highlights a powerful human tendency, when confronted with a genuine mystery from the past, to leap towards the most extraordinary explanation available. The desire for a hidden history, for proof that we are not alone or that our ancestors possessed cosmic knowledge, can reshape ambiguous objects into definitive evidence. The saga, whether a deliberate fabrication or a series of misunderstandings, underscores a crucial lesson for our entire investigation. It reminds us to temper wonder with rigorous questioning, to seek the human story behind the artifact before invoking the interstellar. Our hunger for connection can sometimes write the script before the stone has even spoken, teaching us that the most important tool in uncovering the past is not just curiosity, but a patient and discerning mind. The line between a profound secret and a clever deception is often carved in stone. In the arid coastal region of Peru, a collection of artifacts emerged in the 1960s that would become one of archaeology's most famous. Known as the stones, they are thousands of andesite river rocks, their surfaces etched with intricate, shallow-line carvings. The images depicted are a breathtaking, bewildering of the impossible. They show human figures engaged in what appears to be advanced medical procedures, including open-heart surgery and complex organ transplants. Others portray people using what look like telescopes to study the stars. But the most sensational carvings by far show humans in direct, active contact with creatures we recognize instantly as dinosaurs, riding them like beasts of burden, hunting them with spears, and even engaging them in battle. According to their main promoter, a local physician named, these stones were discovered in ancient burial caves and represented a lost library of a pre-Incan civilization, a people who possessed knowledge of paleontology, astronomy, and medicine far beyond our historical understanding. It was a narrative that promised to rewrite everything. The stones seemed to offer visual, tangible proof that humans and dinosaurs coexisted, a concept that would shatter the foundations of evolutionary biology and geology. They suggested a forgotten global epoch where advanced human culture thrived alongside creatures from a distant age. For a moment, it appeared to be the ultimate evidence of a history we had missed entirely. Yet the scientific community quickly raised profound and ultimately decisive objections. Geologists who examined the stones noted that the patina, the natural weathering film on the rock's surface, was absent in the grooves of the carvings. This indicated the etchings were recent, as a genuinely ancient carving would show weathering inside the lines matching the exterior. Furthermore, the depictions were suspiciously modern in their style and content, mirroring popular mid-century dinosaur illustrations and science fiction tropes. The most damning evidence came from the individuals who actually supplied the stones. After initial claims of discovering them in tombs, some of the farmers who sold the rocks to later admitted they had carved the stones themselves using simple tools, aging them with shoe polish, and selling them as ancient artifacts to tourists and collectors. The entire collection, while vast and artistically interesting, was declared a complex and lucrative hoax. The stones stand not as a mystery from antiquity, but as a critical lesson in our search for it. They represent the powerful human desire to find confirmation for radical ideas, a desire that can sometimes outpace our commitment to verification. This case study teaches us that extraordinary claims demand not just open-minded wonder, but a foundation of rigorous skepticism. It underscores the importance of provenance, of understanding how an object came to light, and of subjecting it to the available tools of analysis. In our journey through artifacts that suggest ancient global contact, we must be vigilant gatekeepers of our own curiosity. Authentic enigmas like the mechanism or the map are challenging enough on their own merits, their truths slowly revealed through patient study. They do not need the distracting noise of modern creations. The stones, in their fabricated grandeur, ultimately serve to strengthen the pursuit of real mysteries, by reminding us that the most valuable discoveries are those that withstand the quiet, persistent light of scrutiny, not just the dazzling appeal of a fantastic story. While the stones were a modern invention, the Peruvian desert holds a much older and undeniably authentic mystery, one drawn on a scale so vast it defies comprehension from the ground. These are the lines, a sprawling gallery of geometric shapes and animal figures etched into the rocky, arid plateau over 2,000 years ago. From the earth, you see only shallow trenches, paths of reddish pebbles cleared to reveal the lighter soil beneath. But ascend to the sky, and the true vision reveals itself. A hummingbird with wings outstretched over 300 feet, a spider nearly 150 feet long, a spiral-tailed monkey, a whale. Triangles, trapezoids, and lines that run arrow-straight for miles across the desert floor, converging and intersecting in a complex, silent diagram. The immediate and overwhelming question is why? Why would a people, without any known means of flight, create art they could never see? The leading theories are rooted in the spiritual and practical world of the culture. Many researchers believe the lines functioned as astronomical calendars, their alignments marking the rising and setting points of the sun, moon, and important stars to track seasons for agriculture. Others see them as sacred pathways, walked during rituals to invoke life-giving water from the parched landscape, with the animal figures representing constellations or spiritual guardians. The sheer logistics of their creation speak to a profound communal purpose. Using simple tools and meticulous planning, teams of people moved millions of tons of surface rock, following designs likely scaled up from smaller models using a system of ropes and stakes. This was not the work of a lone artist, but a sustained, generations-long project of a society united by a shared belief. Yet the very fact of their invisibility from the ground invites a more speculative line of thought. If the creators could not see their own masterpieces, who was the intended audience? This is where the idea of messages for the sky truly takes flight. Some propose the lines were meant for the deities themselves, vast offerings placed upon the earth for the gods in the heavens to observe and appreciate. This spiritual interpretation is powerful and plausible, but it also connects to a tantalizing thread in our broader tapestry. The concept of beings who observe from above is universal, but the act of creating a literal visual signal for them is remarkably specific. Could they have been inspired by stories or myths carried from distant lands, tales of flying machines or skyborne visitors that prompted them to build these immense landing strips or calling cards? Or does their achievement point to an indigenous, yet lost, knowledge of aerial perspective itself? Perhaps through the use of kites, tethered balloons, or even carefully constructed viewing platforms on nearby hills, they found a way to preview their celestial art. The lines do not prove ancient global contact, but they powerfully symbolize the human desire to communicate beyond the horizon, to reach out from our terrestrial plane to something greater. They represent a monumental act of faith, a belief that someone or something was watching. In their silent, sprawling majesty, the lines challenge our understanding of art, purpose, and perspective. They remind us that our ancestors thought on a scale that embraced the sky itself, leaving behind a question written in stones and sand, a question only visible when we finally learn to fly. A single coin can carry the weight of an entire ocean. In the year 1957, archaeologists were excavating a site in coastal Maine, a place inhabited by Native American communities for centuries. Among the stone tools, pottery shards, and other everyday objects, they uncovered something that did not belong, a small, worn silver coin. Closer inspection revealed its true nature. It was a Norse penny, a piece of currency minted in Norway during the reign of King Olaf, dating it firmly to the late 11th century. This tiny artifact, now known as the Maine Penny, is a solitary whisper from a distant shore. To this day, it remains the only pre-Columbian Norse object ever found in the United States, outside the confirmed Viking settlement at Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. Its discovery sent a quiet shockwave through the historical community, for here was a physical, datable piece of Europe, resting in the soil of a 12th century Native American site, centuries before the voyages of Columbus. The immediate and most logical explanation involves the long-distance trade networks that connected indigenous peoples across North America. The Norse had a foothold at Meadows around the year 1000, a brief settlement they called Vinland. While that outpost was abandoned, it is plausible that trade goods, including coins, could have been acquired by local peoples, and then traveled southward through established exchange routes over generations, hand to hand, until this one penny eventually found its resting place in Maine. It is a compelling and likely story of indirect contact. Yet the coin's very existence, regardless of how it arrived, is monumental. For decades, the Norse sagas that spoke of lands west of Greenland were considered semi-mythical legends. Then, Meadows was discovered, proving the Vikings did indeed reach North America. The Maine Penny, though isolated, adds a poignant footnote to that proof. It suggests that the ripple effects of that contact, the material evidence of those fleeting encounters, spread farther than the settlements themselves. It transforms the Viking voyages from a historical footnote into a tangible thread in a wider fabric. This single coin exemplifies a profound truth in archaeology, that the smallest, most solitary artifact can validate vast historical possibilities. It does not prove a Norse village in Maine, but it does prove that objects from North America moved into Native American hands and traveled significant distances. This places the Viking presence firmly within a living, breathing network of indigenous exchange, a network that itself was a kind of ancient global web. The penny is a metallic echo of a meeting between two worlds, a meeting that was brief, likely limited, but undeniably real. It reminds us that ancient global contact was not always about grand fleets or lasting colonies. Sometimes it was about a curious piece of silver changing hands, a story told around a fire, and a coin that traveled so far from home it became a mystery for another age to solve. A single coin can travel, but a face carries a far heavier burden of identity. Deep in the Toluca Valley of Mexico, beneath the ancient ruins of, a discovery in 1933 would ignite a debate that cuts directly to the possibility of transoceanic contact in antiquity. Archaeologists excavating a burial site, a resting place sealed long before the arrival of Spanish conquistadors, unearthed a small head. It was not the stylized, familiar art of the local Aztec or cultures. This face was different, strikingly so. It bore the distinct, naturalistic features of classical Roman sculpture, complete with a beard and the characteristic hairstyle of the 2nd or 3rd century of the Common Era. The artifact, known as the head, was found in a context that appeared undisturbed, within a layer that carbon dating later suggested was sealed around the 1300s, centuries before European contact. The immediate implication was as simple as it was revolutionary. A piece of the Roman world had somehow found its way to pre-Columbian Mexico. The scholarly response was, and remains, deeply divided. Skeptics propose it could be a colonial-era object that accidentally intruded into the older layer, perhaps dropped by a Spanish settler who owned it as a curiosity. Others suggest the possibility of a hoax, though the excavation was conducted by reputable archaeologists, and the head style is not a crude imitation, but a competent representation of a specific Roman artistic period. Its proponents point to the sealed context, and the fact that no similar objects from the colonial period have been found in the region, arguing for its authenticity as a genuine pre-contact find. If we accept that possibility, even tentatively, the questions it unleashes are profound. How did a Roman artifact cross the Atlantic? One theory imagines a Roman vessel, perhaps blown off course from trading routes along the African coast, surviving a harrowing journey to the Americas. While there is no evidence of a Roman settlement, a single shipwreck or a small group of survivors could have introduced the object, which then became a treasured heirloom traded inland over generations. Another, perhaps more plausible, theory envisions a vast and slow chain of exchange. The head may have begun its journey in a Roman workshop, traded to the Middle East, then along the Silk Road to China, across the Pacific via Polynesian or Asian mariners, and finally down the coast of the Americas into central Mexico, a journey taking centuries. This idea transforms the head from a solitary anomaly into a potential testament to a sprawling, indirect network of global trade, where objects could circumnavigate the world through countless hands long before any one culture claimed to have discovered another. The head is more than a portrait. It is a profound question made of clay. It represents the most direct and controversial potential link between the hemispheres in classical times, forcing us to confront the limits of our historical maps. Whether it is proof of a lost voyage or a symbol of unimaginably long-distance exchange, it whispers that the ancient world may have been far more interconnected than our records dare to suggest, and that some connections leave only a silent, terracotta face to speak for them. A face of Roman clay poses a silent question, but a slab of stone from the American Midwest seems to shout its story. In the autumn of 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named was clearing trees on his land near Kensington, Minnesota, when his roots tangled around a heavy, flat stone. After prying it from the earth, he and his neighbor noticed strange markings carved into its face. What they had unearthed was a 200-pound slab of greywaca, covered in runic characters, the ancient alphabet of the Norse. The inscription, dated to the year 1362, told a harrowing tale. It described a party of 8 Swedes and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland far to the west. The text spoke of a tragic event, stating that 10 men were left by the sea to look after their ships, while the others camped by a lake to the north. Upon returning to the coast, they found the 10 men red with blood and dead. The inscription ends with a plea for rescue and a declaration of faith. If genuine, this was not just evidence of Vikings in America, it was a dated, first-hand account of a desperate expedition deep into the continent, over a century after the Norse abandoned their Greenland settlements and 300 years before Columbus. The academic world reacted with intense skepticism that quickly hardened into rejection. Linguists pointed to glaring anachronisms. words and grammatical forms in the runes that were characteristic of 19th century Swedish dialects, not the Old Norse of the 1400s. The very date, written with Arabic numerals in a style not used in medieval runic inscriptions, was seen as a dead giveaway of a modern forger's hand. The prevailing consensus became, and largely remains, that the Kensington was an elaborate hoax crafted by and his neighbors, a piece of nostalgic invention by homesick Scandinavian immigrants longing to carve their own legacy into the new land's ancient past. Yet, a dedicated group of researchers and enthusiasts have never accepted that verdict. They counter with physical evidence, arguing that the weathering in the carved grooves appears centuries old, not freshly cut. They present alternative linguistic analyses suggesting the runes could reflect an isolated, evolving Norse dialect preserved in a remote Scandinavian community. They ask why a simple farmer would possess the esoteric knowledge to create such a complex, if flawed, inscription. The stone itself has become a not just of scholarship, but of cultural identity. For many in the Scandinavian American community, it represents a tangible link to a heroic, exploratory heritage, a proof that their ancestors walked these forests long before others. This emotional investment is key to understanding the stone's enduring power. Whether a genuine artifact or a brilliant forgery, the Kensington perfectly encapsulates the profound human tension between established history and the stories we wish were true. It reflects our deep desire to find ourselves in the ancient narrative of a land, to claim a piece of its deepest past. The debate, more than a century long, is about more than runes and weathering. It is about who gets to write the first chapter of the American story. Even if it is a 19th century creation, it stands as a genuine artifact of a different kind, a monument to the timeless urge to reach back through time and leave a mark, to whisper across the centuries, "We were here." A stone egg holds a world of questions in its palm-sized form. In the summer of 1872, workers digging a post hole near the shores of Lake in New Hampshire struck something hard and smooth. What they pulled from the earth was no ordinary rock, but a dark, egg-shaped object, meticulously carved from a rare and exceptionally hard type of quartzite. Immediately, it was clear this was no natural formation. The Lake Mystery Stone, as it came to be called, is a masterpiece of miniature craftsmanship, its surface covered in a series of intricate, baffling symbols. On one side, a solemn human face. On the other, patterns that look like an ear of corn, a circle with spirals, and other geometric designs. The precision of the carvings is stunning, with holes drilled perfectly through from both ends, meeting in the middle with remarkable accuracy. This was the work of a master artisan, someone with sophisticated tools and a clear, deliberate plan. Yet from the moment of its discovery, the stone has been a riddle without an answer. Who made it, and for what purpose? The symbols offer tantalizing but contradictory clues. The face, and the corn are motifs deeply rooted in the indigenous cultures of North America. Yet the spirals and concentric circles bear a striking resemblance to patterns found in Celtic art from across the Atlantic. This visual fusion has led to a compelling and controversial theory. Could this egg be a physical record of a chance meeting? Imagine a scenario where a Norse or perhaps even a Celtic traveler, centuries ago, encountered a Native American community. As a gesture, or perhaps to document the event, a skilled carver fused symbols from both worlds onto a single, durable object, creating a token of contact meant to be understood by both. It is a beautiful story, one that speaks to our deepest hopes of finding connection. But without any archaeological context, the stone floats in a historical void. It was found alone, with no associated tools, no burial site, no other artifacts to date it or place it within a known culture. This isolation is what makes it so endlessly debated. Is it a uniquely inspired piece of Native American art, perhaps a ceremonial object or a storyteller's aid, incorporating designs that evolved independently? Or is it the sole surviving physical whisper of a transatlantic encounter, a message that lost its meaning when the hands that exchanged it passed from memory. The stone's material adds another layer of intrigue. The specific quartzite is not local to New Hampshire, meaning the rock itself traveled before it was ever carved. This fact alone suggests movement, exchange, and value placed upon the raw material. The mystery stone, in its silent perfection, embodies the very essence of an enigma. It is too specific to be random, too beautiful to be meaningless, yet it refuses to align with any established historical narrative. It sits in a museum case, a polished question mark, reminding us that some artifacts are not meant to provide answers, but to guard their stories closely, challenging us to remain comfortable with the unknown. The polished quartzite of the lake stone holds its secret tight, but in the sediments of a Romanian riverbank, a different metal offers a challenge not of meaning, but of time itself. The story of the wedge begins in 1974, when construction workers digging a trench along the Muirs River, near the town of, unearthed something peculiar. Buried roughly 35 feet down, encased within a thick layer of compacted sand and clay, they found a heavy, wedge-shaped object alongside the massive bones of a mastodon, an ancient elephant relative that went extinct tens of thousands of years ago. The object itself was covered in a thick patina of oxidation. Initially thought to be a piece of stone or perhaps an old axe head, it was set aside with the bones and sent for analysis. What researchers discovered sent a shock through the small circle of scientists who examined it. The wedge was not stone, nor was it iron. It was composed of an alloy primarily made of aluminum, a metal that requires an immensely complex industrial process to produce in pure form, a feat humanity only achieved in the 19th century. The contextual dating was the heart of the contradiction. The mastodon bones suggested the layer in which it was found was at least 11,000 years old, from the Pleistocene epoch. This created an impossible scenario, a sophisticated manufactured metal object resting alongside the remains of a creature from the dawn of humanity's prehistoric past. The scientific community was immediately and profoundly skeptical, and for compelling reasons. The primary explanation is one of stratigraphic intrusion. This theory posits that the wedge is indeed a piece of 20th century machinery, most likely a tooth from a modern excavator or dredging bucket, which accidentally fell into the pit during earlier, unrecorded work. Over time, it settled down through the soil, or was buried by subsequent earthmoving, eventually coming to rest near the ancient bones. The thick aluminum oxide layer, while impressive, could form relatively quickly under the right chemical conditions in the soil, mimicking a great age. In short, the artifact is seen as a case of a modern object contaminating an ancient site, creating a powerful but false archaeological illusion. This rational account is the most widely accepted by mainstream archaeologists and materials scientists. Yet, the very simplicity of the object is what keeps the mystery alive for some. Proponents of its antiquity point to the initial reports that described it as encased within a hardened, undisturbed layer of sediment, not simply lying loose. They note its unusual shape, which does not perfectly match common modern excavator teeth, and the specific composition of the alloy, which included other metals like copper, zinc, and traces of others. This has led to more speculative theories. Could it be evidence of a lost, isolated peak of prehistoric metallurgy, a technological flash in a forgotten culture that discovered how to work this difficult metal, only for the knowledge to vanish completely? The most extreme interpretations, often fueled by the wedge's aerospace-like appearance, suggest it could be a fragment of something not of this earth. These ideas, while captivating, lack any supporting evidence from the archaeological record. There are no smelters, no tools, no other aluminum artifacts from such a period anywhere in the world. The true significance of the wedge may not lie in proving ancient astronauts or forgotten industrial ages, but in what it teaches us about the fragility of context and the discipline required in historical science. It stands as in the principle of parsimony, often called razor, which advises that the simplest explanation with the fewest assumptions is usually correct. Here, the simplest explanation is a modern machine part. Yet, the artifact's journey from a riverbank to a museum case forces a vital humility. It reminds us that the ground is not a perfect, sealed archive, and that objects can move through it in surprising ways. It challenges enthusiasts and professionals alike to separate the thrilling narrative from the painstaking work of verification. In doing so, the wedge serves a crucial purpose. It sharpens our tools of inquiry. Before we can accept an artifact that rewrites history, we must first rule out every possibility that it is merely a whisper from our own time, echoing back at us from an unexpected depth. This object, whether a Pleistocene puzzle or a 20th century intruder, underscores that the most profound mysteries are often those that compel us to look more carefully, not just at the artifact, but at the very earth that holds it. The wedge teaches us to question the earth itself, but another tool offers a lesson written in stone and iron. Near the town of London, Texas, in 1936, a curious discovery was made along the banks of Red Creek. A piece of Cretaceous rock, formed when dinosaurs roamed the earth, had split open to reveal something startling inside. Encased within the solid stone was a hammer, a simple tool with a wooden handle and an iron head. To those who first saw it, the message seemed undeniable, a human artifact from the modern era impossibly trapped in rock over 100 million years old. This is the London Hammer, and for decades it has been championed as the ultimate proof that our timeline of history is profoundly wrong, that humans and dinosaurs walked the earth together. The visual is compelling, a stark juxtaposition of the familiar and the ancient that seems to defy all conventional understanding. It represents the kind of find that could, at a glance, rewrite every textbook. Yet geology provides a clear and elegant explanation for this apparent miracle. The hammer was not found within a pristine, ancient sedimentary layer that formed slowly over eons. It was discovered inside what is known as a concretion. This is a hard, rounded mass that forms when mineral cement, often limestone, precipitates from water and solidifies around a foreign object. In this case, the object was a 19th century miner's hammer, likely lost or discarded near the creek. The region's water, rich in dissolved minerals from the surrounding Cretaceous limestone, percolated around the tool. Over a period of decades, layers of calcite built up, hardening into a stone shell that perfectly molded itself to the hammer's shape. When that concretion later cracked open, it created the perfect illusion, a modern tool seemingly fossilized in deep time. This natural process is common and well understood by geologists. The London Hammer stands as perhaps the most famous example of how nature can manufacture a stunning archaeological paradox. It is in the difference between appearance and process. Our eyes see a hammer in ancient rock, but the scientific method reveals a much shorter, more recent story of mineral accretion. This artifact teaches a vital, and perhaps humbling, lesson for our entire exploration. In the passionate search for evidence of ancient global contact, or any paradigm-shifting discovery, the object itself is only part of the puzzle. The London Hammer is extraordinary, but its context is not unambiguous. The extraordinary claim it appears to support requires an extraordinary context, one that rules out all conventional explanations like concretion, intrusion, or contamination. For an artifact to truly rewrite history, it must be found in a sealed, datable layer that has been undisturbed for, accompanied by other cultural evidence, and analyzed with rigorous methods that eliminate the possibility of a natural or modern origin. The real value of the London Hammer is not as proof of a lost age, but as a reminder of the patience and discipline required to uncover true mysteries. It asks us to look beyond the initial, breathtaking contradiction and to understand the slow, creative forces of the earth itself. Before we can accept an artifact that connects ancient worlds, we must first ensure it is not simply a message from a much more recent past, artfully encased in stone by the quiet chemistry of a Texas creek. Stone can speak a language of ambition and isolation. On a speck of land in the vast emptiness of the Pacific, a civilization carved its soul into volcanic rock. The of Easter Island, or are more than mysterious heads, they are full-bodied statues, some standing over 30 feet tall and weighing up to 80 tons. Their solemn faces gaze inland, guardians watching over clan territories, carved from a single quarry with stone hand tools in a process that required generations of knowledge and labor. The true marvel, however, is not just their creation, but their journey. How did a society with no wheels, no draft animals, and limited resources move these monolithic giants across miles of rugged terrain to their coastal platforms? The answer is a testament to human ingenuity and unity. Oral traditions and modern experiments suggest the statues were walked upright, rocked and tilted forward in a careful, rhythmic dance by teams pulling on ropes, a slow, perilous procession that turned the island itself into a stage for a monumental engineering ballet. This achievement in extreme isolation forces a profound reconsideration of Polynesian capability. Easter Island is one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, a tiny volcanic triangle over 2,000 kilometers from the nearest populated shore. The ancestors of the people found it by navigating the open ocean using the stars, waves, and flight patterns of birds in voyaging canoes that were masterpieces of maritime technology. Their society flourished there, building these giants, until ecological pressures led to hardship. The existence of this sophisticated culture on this tiny, isolated island proves one thing unequivocally: the Pacific was not a barrier for these explorers, it was a highway. This realization opens a door to a tantalizing possibility. If Polynesian navigators could find and settle an island as remote as, is it so hard to believe they could have gone farther? Could the easternmost reach of their exploration have touched the western shores of the Americas? Intriguing clues suggest they might have. The sweet potato, a crop native to South America, was present across Polynesia, including Easter Island, long before European contact. The word for it in many Polynesian languages bears a striking resemblance to its Quechua name from the Andes. Similarly, some linguistic and genetic studies point to potential, if limited, interaction. This does not imply colonization or empire, but perhaps something more subtle: a chance landfall, a meeting, an exchange of plants and words before both parties return to their own vast oceanic worlds. In their silent, enduring watch, are the ultimate symbol of this idea. They were not built by a people who feared the ocean, but by the descendants of those who conquered it. They remind us that ancient global contact was not always about sustained trade routes or mapped voyages. Sometimes it was about the far-flung edges of human expansion briefly brushing against one another. These stone giants stand on their lonely shore, not as proof of a specific trans-Pacific voyage, but as a monumental declaration that for some cultures, no distance was too great and no ocean wide enough to contain the human spirit of exploration. The silent guardians of Easter Island watch over a land surrounded by endless ocean, but beneath the waves off another island shore, a different kind of sentinel lies submerged. Just off the coast of the westernmost island of Japan, divers exploring in the 1980s encountered a sight that stopped them cold. Rising from the sea floor, some 80 feet below the surface, was a colossal, stepped structure. It appeared like a sunken ziggurat or a vast, tiered plaza, with sharp, flat terraces, what looked like straight staircases, and stark, 90-degree angles. The scale was monumental, larger than a football field, and its geometric precision felt utterly out of place in the natural, undersea world of coral and rock. This is the monument, and from the moment of its discovery, it has been the center of a fierce and unresolved debate. Is this the ruins of a lost city, or a masterpiece of geological chance? The principal proponent of the artificial theory is marine geologist of the University of the, after hundreds of dives and years of study, argues passionately that the structure is man-made, pointing to specific features that defy easy natural explanation. He notes the consistent right angles of the terraces, the straight, parallel channels that resemble roads, and the presence of two round holes that look like they were drilled. Most strikingly, he identifies a section of the rock that resembles a carved human face, complete with eyes and a mouth, and what appears to be a relief carving of an animal. If his interpretation is correct, the implications are staggering. Based on sea level rise data, the structure would have been above water and potentially inhabited over 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. This would place its builders in a prehistoric epoch, a sophisticated culture capable of monumental stone architecture, in a time when mainstream history tells us humans were only beginning to settle into agricultural life. Such a discovery would not just rewrite Japanese history, it would suggest a lost chapter of Pacific civilization, a culture of seafarers whose lands were swallowed by the rising oceans, potentially connecting to myths of sunken continents like Mu, or the opposing view, held by many mainstream geologists, offers a powerful counter-narrative. They explain that the formation is part of a vast sandstone bedrock, a material particularly susceptible to a natural process called jointing. As tectonic forces stress the rock, it fractures along straight lines, creating natural planes and right angles. Powerful tidal currents in the area then act like sandpaper, eroding the softer layers of sandstone at different rates, which can produce the appearance of carved steps and flat platforms. The so-called face and animal carving, they argue, are classic examples of pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar patterns in random shapes, amplified by the play of light and shadow underwater. For these scientists, is a stunning and beautiful example of natural architecture, but architecture nonetheless crafted by the patient, immense forces of the earth. This debate places us on the very frontier of underwater archaeology, where every observation is filtered through the medium of water, and where the tools of investigation must account for both geological process and human possibility. The monument exists in a hazy middle ground, a test of stone where one person sees a plaza and another sees a particularly dramatic cliff face. Yet, even within the geological explanation, there is room for wonder. If such convincing mimicry of human design can occur naturally, what does that say about the patterns we impose on the world? And if, by some chance, even a small part of the structure was modified or enhanced by ancient hands, it would point to a people adapting a naturally awe-inspiring site for their own purposes, a sacred space chosen precisely because its forms seemed divinely crafted. Remains an open question, a puzzle resting in the silent blue gloom. It challenges us to refine our eyes, to distinguish the hand of humanity from the hand of time, water, and stone. Whether a sunken city or a sunken sculpture garden made by nature, it stands as a profound reminder that our planet still holds vast, unexplored chapters, and that some of the greatest mysteries are not in the stars, but beneath the waves, waiting for us to learn how to read their submerged language. Stone and metal can be debated, but a root vegetable carries its own quiet testimony. The sweet potato, a staple crop with its origins in the Andes Mountains of South America, presents one of the most compelling biological puzzles. This plant was widespread across Polynesia, from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island, long before any European explorer set foot in the Pacific. The Polynesians had a name for it. In the Quechua language of the Andes, the word for sweet potato is. This linguistic echo across 10,000 miles of open ocean is not a faint whisper. It is a clear and resonant call. How did this American crop become a cornerstone of Pacific Island agriculture? The simplest explanation is also the most profound: people carried it. This suggests that at some point, Polynesian voyagers reached the South American coast, or perhaps South American raft sailors drifted into the Pacific, and an exchange took place. It was not a conquest or a colonization, but a meeting where gifts were shared, and among the most valuable was food. The sweet potato, hardy and nutritious, then sailed back with the islanders, becoming a vital part of their survival as they settled the most remote islands on Earth. This is not the story of a lost artifact, but of a living, growing one, a botanical witness to a connection that history books missed. The exchange appears to have flowed both ways. On the coast of south-central Chile, archaeologists made a startling discovery at a site called El. They found chicken bones, but these were not from birds introduced by the Spanish. Radiocarbon dating placed them between 1300 and 1420, well before European contact. Genetic analysis confirmed these chickens were not of local origin. Their DNA matched fowl from Polynesia, specifically from Tonga and Samoa. Here was a Southeast Asian domestic animal, carried across the Pacific by Polynesian settlers, apparently brought all the way to the shores of South America. A chicken is not a seed that can float on the currents. It is a living cargo that requires care and intention on a voyage. This find suggests that the contact was direct enough, and the voyages skilled enough, to transport live animals across the world's greatest ocean. Together, the sweet potato and the chicken form a complementary pair of evidence, a plant and an animal, each telling a side of the same story, a story of reciprocal exchange between the great civilizations of the Pacific and the Americas. The most intimate evidence, however, is written within us. Modern genetic studies of human populations sometimes reveal markers that tell a deeper, older story of movement. In some indigenous communities in South America, researchers have identified traces of genetic lineages that suggest a very ancient and very limited influx from populations in Australasia, a connection that seems impossibly old and complex. Other studies point to potential Polynesian genetic signatures along the Pacific coast. This evidence is subtle, controversial, and constantly being refined with new science, but its implication is monumental. It suggests that the connections we see in artifacts and crops were accompanied by people, and that those people left a legacy not just in the soil, but in the very bloodlines of continents. These biological clues are the hardest evidence of all to dismiss. An object can be a hoax, a map can be misinterpreted, but a shared word for a food, the DNA of a centuries-old chicken bone, a faint genetic signal passed down through hundreds of generations, these are not forged. They are the silent, enduring witnesses to real encounters. They point to a form of ancient global contact that was less about empires and more about the resilient, curious nature of humanity itself. It was not always the grand fleet setting out with a king's commission. Often, it was the fisherman blown off course, the family seeking a new island, the trader following the stars beyond the horizon. It was the slow, steady, courageous drift of people across the water, carrying their world with them in a canoe, a basket of cuttings, a clutch of eggs. These journeys wove a subtle but real web across the planet, long before anyone drew a map that claimed to show the whole world. The connections were fleeting, perhaps forgotten by the next generation, but they left their mark in the crops that grew, the animals that thrived, and the children who inherited a story from two shores. This is the final, and perhaps most beautiful, layer of the mystery, not just objects out of place, but life itself, forever intertwined by the brave, uncharted voyages of the ancient world. These scattered clues, from gears to glyphs, do not point to a single forgotten empire. Instead, they sketch the outlines of a different kind of map, one not of political borders, but of recurring human fascinations. Look across them, and you see patterns emerge like constellations against the dark sky of the past. A persistent drive to chart the heavens appears in the mechanism and the lines. An astonishing mastery of materials and precision geometry echoes from the spheres to the stonework of. The recurring suggestion of impossible voyages is written on the map and carried in the humble sweet potato. Each artifact stands alone, its story debated, its authenticity sometimes questioned. Yet together, they form a chorus of whispers, and the collective message is difficult to ignore. It invites us to consider a paradigm shift in how we view our ancestors. Perhaps we should move away from the image of ancient civilizations as isolated cradles, each inventing the wheel or the stars in splendid solitude. A more compelling, and perhaps more human, picture emerges, one of sporadic but real connection. Imagine ancient humanity not as separate islands, but as a scattered archipelago. The seas between were vast and dangerous, but not impermeable. Currents could carry a vessel off course. A trader might follow a story of distant lands for one more port. A storm could blow a fishing boat for weeks, depositing survivors on an unknown shore. These were not planned voyages of globalization, but accidents of wind and wave, or the brave, incremental explorations of cultures like the Polynesians for whom the ocean was a home. Each chance meeting, each rare successful return journey became a node in a fragile, intermittent network. A piece of knowledge could be exchanged, a seed could change hands, a design could be sketched in the sand and remembered. This idea does not require a single, mythical supercivilization like Atlantis to explain everything. It simply acknowledges the enduring traits of our species, curiosity, resilience, and an incredible capacity for adaptation. It suggests that innovation was rarely born in a vacuum. A spark of an idea in one culture, carried by a traveler, could ignite a new tradition in another, adapted to local materials and beliefs until its original source was forgotten. The light might be a spiritual symbol inspired by a traveler's tale of experiments elsewhere. The head could be a treasured heirloom from a chain of trade spanning centuries. The true mystery, then, may not be a simple yes or no to ancient global contact. The biological evidence of the sweet potato and the chicken suggests it did happen. The real, deeper enigma lies in the scale. How often did these threads of connection cross the oceans and continents? And perhaps more hauntingly, how much of what was shared was ultimately lost? Knowledge is fragile. It lives in libraries that burn, in oral traditions that fade when a language dies, in craft techniques that vanish when a master passes without an apprentice. The great cataclysms of history, from rising seas swallowing coastal settlements to the quiet collapse of trade routes, have erased countless chapters. What we have found, these 20 tantalizing artifacts, might be the surviving fragments of a much larger, richer dialogue, a conversation between distant minds that has now fallen silent. They are the echoes of a story we are only beginning to hear again, a story that suggests our ancient world was far more curious, far more connected, and far more adventurous than we ever dared to dream. This scattered evidence paints a portrait of a restless and curious ancient world. Our journey through these 20 mysterious artifacts reveals a history far more dynamic and interconnected than any simple, linear timeline could ever contain. From the intricate bronze gears of the mechanism to the silent terracotta face of a potential Roman in Mexico, each object is more than a relic, it is an invitation. An invitation to question the stories we have been told, to wonder at the capabilities we have underestimated, and to remain profoundly humble in the face of our ancestors' ingenuity and courage. While healthy skepticism is an essential tool, a shield against forgery and fantasy, so too is the courage to reconsider established narratives when the evidence whispers a different tale. The search for evidence of ancient global contact is not a pursuit of fringe theories for their own sake. At its heart, it is a search for a fuller, richer understanding of the human spirit itself, of our innate drive to explore, to connect, and to share knowledge across the vast distances that once seemed impassable. This quest reframes our entire past, not as a series of isolated experiments, but as a slow, intermittent, yet real conversation across continents. So what other secrets lie buried in forgotten shipwrecks, sealed within undiscovered tombs, or encoded in languages we can no longer read? What other chapters of our shared human story are waiting for a curious mind, a new technology, or a simple stroke of luck to bring them back to light? The greatest mystery may be what we have yet to find. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which of these artifacts compels you the most? Subscribe for more journeys into history's greatest puzzles, and above all, keep questioning the world around you. The past is not a closed book. It is an open conversation, and we are only just beginning to listen.